When you're designing a program, there are limitations. Just like in designing a product, you can have something that's good, you can have something that's fast, and you can have something that's cheap. You can't have all three. If you get two, then you're usually ahead of the game. But because of how competition works, if you are good, fast, and cheap, you're probably a scam. If you're good and you're fast, you're probably not cheap. You're probably quite expensive. If you're fast and you're cheap, then you're probably not high quality or not very good. If you're good and you're cheap, it's probably going to take a long time. You're not very fast. Usually you can get two if you're exceptional. You're never getting all three. If you're getting all three, you have a monopoly, there's no market. That doesn't make much sense. Continuity programs and these sorts of things have the same type of idea. There's the same type of limitation you're going to deal with. The ones that I've outlined, though, are cost, so you still have your cheap or expensive. You've got speed, which you still have your fast and slow, but this is your cycle length or your operational period. So how long something takes, you still have that limitation. How often you're going to go through that whole cycle that we've outlined. Is it going to be once every half year, once a year, once every longer than a year? It shouldn't be, once every quarter. Just depends. You can do these once a month if you design them in such a way where they can do that. Except just keep in mind, if you do that, it limits your analysis. And this comes into the number 3, which is what people consider to be good, but it depends, which is comprehensiveness, how large your scope is, right? There is this relationship between your depth of scope, your cost, and your time. If you're doing something that has a very, very broad scope and you're not allocating a lot of resources to it, you're not allocating a lot of employees, it's going to take a long time. If you're allocating a ton of money to something, you can do something pretty deep and fairly fast, but you've got to throw resources at it, right? You're not going to be able to get all 3 magically. And then, of course, with this one, and this is kind of tied into the comprehensiveness, you've got due diligence, you've got your quality control. Because look, you can do an analysis pretty quickly on something pretty deep, and it can be 90% BS. You can just make stuff up, and it can be really deep, but you've made stuff up. So you need to ideally have some mechanism built in to make sure that the stuff you're putting down isn't just useless garbage. Having said that, in the interest of being quick, sometimes you do want to just put it in, be close, it's fine. I'm going to say that let's say you have a business that grosses 10 million a year, it's a fairly small business. It says that, a catastrophic impact to the business is $7 million. And it turns out their actual catastrophic amount was 8. It was over 6. Most of the impacts they're dealing with, once you get above that 5 million, etc. mark, are so massive that they were wrong, but they weren't wrong by enough where it made a huge difference. Now, it could, in a niche situation, have made a difference, but if finding out that they were wrong took them 3 years, then for those 3 years they didn't have anything practically useful. And that's a bigger problem than being slightly off by that number. So you got to factor these 4 things in: your cost, your speed, your breadth or comprehensiveness of scope, and your level of due diligence and, fact checking, or as it were. You got to factor all those in. But you've got to sacrifice something somewhere for something else, because all of these take resources from each other. You need all 4, but you got to figure out where your priorities are in each. And I'm going to tell you right now, for this sort of thing, speed is an incredibly high priority. So you're going to have to figure out where you're going to cut corners. The first place I'm going to recommend to cut corners on is going to be scope. Because if you learn how to do this process with a more refined scope quickly, you learn how to be accurate, and you learn how to kind of do this efficiently, then as you get more effective at doing this, you can broaden scope, and it's not as much of a resource drain. The easiest thing to cut when you're learning how to do this sort of process is going to be scope. Start with one department that does one thing. If back on that function process application thing that we were talking about in the first section, if you're going to do like the whole sales process or the whole sales function, do it only at a function level. Maybe just the function and a few of its processes. Don't do the whole business. If you do the whole business, do the whole business only at the strategic or function level. Don't even look at the processes. Start with a very narrow scope, and then when you do that right, next round, add in processes. You've already done the functions, right? Kind of build it step by step. You don't get bogged down by way too much data, way too much information. So it's pretty straightforward, right? You have that whole process, and I think about here, we'll put an example of, that an image with that whole cycle. You have this cycle, and you've got your limitations on cost, you've got your limitations on etc. Think about how long it will probably take you to do each one of these things and where you want to focus your resources. This video series will give you an idea of what it's like to walk through this so you can get some of an idea. But here's the thing. Let's say you're doing this for the first time and you've never done this before. And you're doing the BIA and you've set out 6 months to do this, and you've spent a month on the BIA. Let's say you're in month 3 now. You spent a month on the program design and the risk assessment. You've spent a month on the BIA, and you haven't even started looking at continuity strategies. You haven't started looking at incident response. You haven't gone to making a plan. You haven't implemented, and we have to get around to running an exercise on this stuff to find out if it even works. Is this happening 3 years from now? At some point, you have to say, okay, you know what? Just finish the analysis so we have something to work with, because it's taking too long, and you just get through it so that you have something to work with. Don't get bogged down in waiting for it to be perfect. If something is dragging on, finish it and move on, and then record what corners you cut so that when you do it again, you can focus on those corners so you don't have to keep reinventing the wheel. Okay, this is that's basically the idea. But you need to. I've seen it so many times, especially in the analysis section. People spend way too long and spend way too many resources, and they never get to solutions. Conversely, I've seen situations where people rush the analysis section and they do it in like 3 effective operating hours. They just completely rush it. And then they go to solutions and they have no data. So someone just kind of checks out Google and goes, okay, what do I do? Let's just buy this thing. And then the thing doesn't make any sense. So you still need to do the analysis. It's just, there's places where you cut corners. And I'll show you where you can kind of cut corners in your first time around with this until you get more used to the process. That'll be fairly apparent when you see me walk through these other various sections. So that's the general idea with what we're doing here. I have all these examples. I already talked about like the McDonald's thing in the previous Lightboard, and I think that kind of gets the point. The purpose of these examples really is to just give you a better understanding of what scope is and to help you really refine what you're doing, okay? And it once again comes back to fundamentally pick one thing and then pick a specific thing within that thing. If you're doing a continuity of operations program for a hospital emergency department, for example, just do the ER. Don't do the entire hospital. Don't do all of the things that connect to the ER. And I get it. Everything's cross-integrated. And how do I not incorporate everything? I understand. But when you do that, you get so bogged down in details, it becomes useless. Get there later. Right? The first time, just kind of understand how you work and how this functions, and then integrate everything else in, or you get way too bogged down in details and the thing isn't usable. I have seen so many plans in professional environments by government institutions like healthcare establishments where the plans are they're useless. They're so bogged down in detail. You could ask somebody what happens in the situation, and they've never read it because it's pointless. They have no idea, and there's just too much. There's too many moving parts. They can't comprehend what's going on. It's not tangible enough, or it's not simplistic enough to be understood, right? They're trying to kind of AI their way through these situations now, and it doesn't work because these problems are not something that they've written down before. So it's like new knowledge to them. It's ridiculous. Anyways, next we're going to look at risk assessments and risk assessments. Yeah.